At a major Hollywood studio, in a corner office of Sub-Basement D, the development executives toil in obscurity to reboot it. Happy Halloween, ladies and gentlemen. We are back, season 3 of Reboot It, and we have got a spooky one for you today. Very much getting into the spirit of the season, and with me, as always, to do so is the Reboot crew. You know him from Hot Takes with Billy Business, now in its farewell season, Mr. Billy Business.
I'm excited to be here. When Invisible Man came out earlier in quarantine, my first thought was like, damn, that's a rebooted episode right there. That's something we would have come up with. So it'll be fun to kind of reinvent some of these characters.
Absolutely. We'll set the ground rules for who's part of our Universal Monster episode and who's not. But before that, a monster in and of himself, a pop culture monster, a pop culture juggernaut, Mr. Ed Grier.
Hey, thank you guys so much. I took the bolts out of my neck and I'm ready to work.
And finally, you know him from the Nerd Goat podcast, Mr. Ron Swallow.
Yeah, don't forget the books. The Breakfast in a Book with Swallow. Come on. It's the best credit I have, guys. Tens of people. You guys,
Do you have poker bookie collecting with Ron Swallow on Twitch? Like, can I watch someone come try to collect on you?
Oh, yeah, that's a great idea. I love that idea. That is a great idea. Just me being punched in the face by big people over and over again. I love that.
It's the reality show version of Rounders. That's what I want, Ron.
Just seeing Ron go, you don't know where I've been.
I love it. I love it.
Well, gentlemen, we are doing the Universal Monsters franchise today. I am excited about this one chiefly for the reason that Universal themselves have been trying to do this just really blatantly and sloppily for decades at this point. They think they have a Marvel-style franchise in this collection of monster movies from the 1940s. I want to see if we can actually achieve that, because so far they have not been able to. Mm-hmm. So before we get too deep into it, I just want to know from each of you, do you have a favorite Universal monster? Billy, go ahead.
Of all the movies, and I'll be frank, not because they're horror movies, because, that has nothing to do with it, but like, these aren't something that are super reverent to me, which I kind of think makes it a little bit more fun. But of all of them, I would say the Boris Karloff Frankenstein, that's the one that I'm most familiar with, probably the one that I enjoyed the most when I watched all of these, in film school. I think we watched like this and Black Lagoon and Mummy and all those fun stuff. So Frankenstein is the one to me that's kind of like the heart and the soul and the tragic story that I really like.
All right, Ed, what do you think? Favorite monster?
Mine is the Wolfman, just because I think people discount the gravitas of the curse of the Wolfman. You your body's taken over. You're not in control of your actions. You become basically a serial killer. Whether you're a good guy or not, you become a serial killer for a short amount of time each month or whatever. It's just like, it's such a cross to bear that I think it makes for powerful storytelling.
Got it. Ron, favorite Universal monster?
Mine's obviously Invisible Man, because I want to look at butts. I'm Frankenstein too.
Ron, how are you getting us canceled in the first 5 minutes of this show?
I liked Frankenstein. I read it as a kid when and it creeped me out, but it also was interesting at the same time. The tragic story. I mean, it's rich.
Okay.
A lot of central wounds on that one.
So many central wounds.
Yeah, he's got so many of them sewn up.
Plus, a great theme of who's the real monster. Is it your outside or is it your insides?
Okay, I think that's a recurring theme in the Universal Monsters.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, we'll definitely get into that. For me, this is kind of a weird one. I think my favorite is the Mummy. Having nothing to do with the Brendan Fraser or certainly the Tom Cruise versions of that franchise, but I have always been in the bag for Egyptian mythology and Egyptian mysticism in general. And I think aesthetically, I always found The Mummy the creepiest. The whole idea of like the lost tombs and the zombies coming back to life and the curse of it all. I just think it's super rich. Let's get into what we mean when we talk about the Universal monsters, because this is actually an almost unwieldy umbrella to put these characters under. The Universal monsters as we know them actually started, and this is a little bit bizarre, in 1925 with The Phantom of the Opera. And I think because the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical has become such the operant version of that story for most people, you forget that it actually began as a straight up horror tale that was the original Universal monster movie made in 1925. From there, you got the more classic ones. You got your Bela Lugosi Dracula. You got your Boris Karloff Frankenstein. I believe it was also Boris Karloff in The Mummy. You got the Invisible Man. You got the Bride of Frankenstein. You got the Wolfman. And then it matriculated into a bunch of sequels, too many to count, until finally kind of coming to an end with the creature from the Black Lagoon, the Gill Man, in the 1950s. That was very much the last monster introduced, and really marked sort of the beginning of the end for this whole Universal Monsters franchise, which did exist for about 20, 30 years of uninterrupted. I don't know that they were all hits, but you were getting multiple movies a year from this franchise that was doing really, really well. Went away by the time we got to the late 50s and certainly into the 60s and the 70s. And then there was a bit of a resurgence in the 90s. And there's some great videos elsewhere on YouTube kind of talking about that's where this idea of the dark universe first started coming to be. Like, how can we make these auteur-driven, almost artistic horror films, the likes of Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula and Wolf with Jack Nicholson, and The Mummy kind of didn't fit into that pattern, but again was very much Universal trying to recapture the magic of the golden age of their monster movies. Most recently, we saw Tom Cruise and Russell Crowe star in a action-adventure romp version of The Mummy that was supposedly going to kick off a new version of the dark universe after Dracula Untold, which was another attempt to kick off the dark universe, bombed. After The Wolfman with Benicio del Toro, which was another attempt to kick off the dark universe, bombed.
It was such a Trump thing where it was just like, oh, no, that wasn't the start. This one's the start. And then it bombed. It's like, oh, no, we never said that was the start. This is the start. 3 times. 3 times before they finally called time of death on this thing.
It's been a bizarre... And I don't know if you out there watching this pay as much attention to this as we do, but there have been a constant stream of announcements in the trades about Universal putting writers' rooms together, hiring big-name screenwriters, plotting this franchise, and it just never comes to be. It always tanks. So the most recent example, I guess, is actually The Invisible Man. And we can talk about this a little bit. I don't believe that they were treating The Invisible Man as the first in a franchise.
No.
It was a co-production with Blumhouse, and Blumhouse treated it like they do all of their horror properties, which is let's make a lean, mean, scary, modern horror movie and let the chips fall where they may. And by all accounts, fell in a pretty nice array. That was a bit of a return to form for the Universal monsters, even if it's not necessarily something you could build a franchise on. So in terms of defining where we're starting, I put it to the group. Is The Invisible Man part of what we're doing here? Or do we leave that aside, let it be its own thing, and our dark universe, Universal Horror Monsters, is going to be separate from that?
I'm gonna say that movie works so well. I'm honestly watching it. I was half super impressed and half super pissed that it wasn't ours. So I'm going to say, out of pure respect for how great of a movie I truly think Invisible Man is, that we let that stand on its own and we come in and we do our own thing. That's my vote.
Okay.
Yeah, I concur. Simple as that. I concur.
Yeah, I agree, just because, look, I know that I'm the negative one, and there are things that make me have to be that we won't go into, but straight up, invisibility is dumb and it sucks because it's useless. You can't steal nothing because they see an apple or a gun bopping all around. You got to be naked. You know, if we were doing it as, you know, a physiological process, is what I mean. I won't talk about the movie, but they do it a lot better than that. They do it a lot better and a lot more effective than you got to be naked and have a bunch of, you know, burrs in your foot every time you want to go skulk about. You know what I mean? It's just so useless. So just for a practical thing and a modern incarnation, I don't want to deal with invisibility, and certainly not as a serum.
I'm going to make that unanimous. I say that Invisible Man movie is what it is, but it doesn't have any bearing on what we're doing here today. So I think the first thing we should do, because this is obviously a little bit different than what we've done in the past, we're talking about what almost necessarily has to be a multi-movie franchise, although maybe not. We'll get into it. But let's define the monsters that we're using. And I think it's pretty straightforward. I think you have to have Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Wolfman, right? And then from there, I would add on the creature from the Black Lagoon and the mummy. And then if we want to do the bride, I think there's an argument to be made that the Bride of Frankenstein is very much an integral part of that original franchise. But that would be my thinking. Weigh in, everybody.
Where is Jekyll and Hyde off the table? Are they not?
Jekyll and Hyde was never part of the original Universal Monsters franchise, which is the weird thing about the Russell Crowe character in the Tom Cruise Mummy movie.
I'm fine leaving it out. I kind of do think that a lot of the same themes and issues as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde can probably be just as easily explored with the Wolfman, who's I think aesthetically probably more interesting. So
nice.
I think that's dead on. Ron, Ed, what do you guys think?
Ron.
I'm thinking about, well, I those are all great. I 100% agree we should have those guys in those five, and I think the bride will be important as well. I'm just wondering, well, we'll get into it. I'm just thinking about the overall, the bigness of this and how we do this, where, I don't know, we'll see where we go. I have a couple ideas.
I can at least throw out, I think it's a mistake to try right off the bat to do your League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, to do your Avengers.
That's what I'm thinking about too.
Yeah, I think
this is single movies that turns into that, possibly.
Honestly, there's nothing more embarrassing for Universal than the fact that there's a photo shoot with every single person who was supposed to be in the Dark Universe that now stands as a weird time capsule of when they thought they had hot shit and they didn't. So for me, I would rather boil it down like, okay, we have these five characters. How did they each, it's almost like picking a villain for a comic book movie. Like, what do these characters say about us as people, so that we don't end up having, like, you know, I think once we can figure out, like, what's the defining kind of characteristic of that character, I think the stories will become much easier. And that's why I was saying, like, with Jekyll Hyde and Wolfman, like, I feel like we'd be, you know, bang our heads against the wall trying to figure out how to fit one of them into it, because one of them already served that role. So it's using their individual movies to see what their purpose is for the larger thing. The Avengers did it beautifully. Tony was your mouthy rebellion tech guy. Captain Rogers was your strategist, your company man. Hulk was your muscle. You already got all that in their individual movies, so it made sense by the time it all coalesced. And I think you just have to take from the Marvel playbook because they're the only ones that have done it successfully.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I'm definitely not trying to but that at all.
Sure,
But I am saying one thing that we find ourselves doing if we do this is making like a bunch of movies, which we've done before. We did it with Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, things of this nature. So I'm not really balking at that part. I'm just saying it out loud. The other thing is, I think what Universal found out is that for a modern audience, you ain't trying to watch no whole ass mummy movie, dog. You ain't about to watch no whole ass lagoon ass movie. How do you keep them out of the water for an hour and a half? What do you do? I don't understand.
But then how did they? But they found a way to get you to watch a whole ass Invisible Man movie. They found a spin on it that made sense
Invisible
to
Man
us.
is so much more deep, especially in the way that they did it, than everybody in this whole team except for Dracula. Except for Dracula and maybe my favorite, the Wolfman. He's so much deeper than any of these guys to me.
But they did that. I feel like they did that. And I'm saying that's our job is to, how can you make a whole ass mummy movie? How do you make a whole ass instead of a half ass for each one? I want 5 whole asses. I want all the full whole asses and then one mega booty at the end.
I would like to suggest that we add more
asses, yes,
as we like to say,
totally agreed.
Agency to each of these characters, because a lot of times what seems to happen is the mummy is this character that does this curse thing, and that's all that the mummy is.
Ooh, I gotta push back, Ron. I mean,
I'm just saying a lot of times, not all the time. Obviously, it's in the worst movies, but that's not all it is. I think we can make it more, is what I'm saying.
No, what I'm saying is I think that's intentional, and we have to preserve that.
Oh.
I think the through line, and so like let's get into this. I know we usually start by asking, what does an audience expect out of this franchise? But I think it's maybe more important to start with these guys with what do their stories actually mean? What are these stories about?
Okay.
And for me, Ron, to your point, I think these stories are very much about how the world rejects that which is different. And I think that you see that in the Wolfman, in Dracula, certainly in Frankenstein. I think the creature from the Black Lagoon can be that, even if that was never fully realized. And I think the Mummy is probably the thinnest version of that. But it's the idea that the monsters are monsters, right? Like we're not trying to make them sympathetic heroes. And I do think that would be a mistake.
That is totally what I wanted to do, but I totally get that.
I'll really push. We're going to argue a lot if that's what you're going to try to do.
I don't have that much. I think it would be better, but I'm also not committed to that. I think I think why that's my instinct is because they've already done the thing where they're monsters, and I think it's been seen so many times. But I totally get that preserving the the joy and the scariness of the original movies makes a lot of sense. So that's where I'm coming from in that.
And I guess just to put some nuance into what I'm saying, the whole idea is that they do monstrous things and they do legitimately horrific things, but they exist in a world where they are so persecuted, they are so unable to live a normal life, that I think there's a certain amount of sympathy that you gain for them just by virtue of the fact that, like, it's not even an option to integrate into society. And so you really have these stories of the ultimate outsiders who are not necessarily nice and are not necessarily heroic and are not even necessarily doing selfless things. But it's almost like the meta text is about how messed up the world is in almost a nihilistic way, because there's no fixing it. And so I don't know if that's exactly the stories that we want to be telling, but to me, that's always been what these stories are at their core.
Can I ask a question? And I'm going to directly but myself from what I said earlier. Is there a reason why they all have to kind of coalesce into one story? Is it enough that they just all exist in this universe of the world and that people are aware that there is a creature of the Black Lagoon, thus the idea of Frankenstein is scarier because they know these kinds of things already exist? Like, is that enough? The thing is, when you build up this super group and now you have this all-star Avengers of Monsters, but if they're not sympathetic, you've just built the Legion of Doom, and it's like the more interesting part is how are we going to stop them? And I feel like the spotlight should be on the monsters, not necessarily like this. What are all these monsters? They don't even have the same wants. It would be very strange why they would even be together.
I mean, there was a part of me that was, when we first stopped into this, that was thinking Suicide Squad-ish type thing, where almost like the government has somehow gained control over these monsters. But we have to start. Hold on. But the problem is we'd have to start with the first movies first, and then move into how that all got happening. It becomes so big that it seems unwieldy, and that's where I'm at with all of this. Is like, I'm just thinking how, like, is it better, like you said, to just do a movie for Frankenstein, a movie for Wolfman, and then leave it, at those 5 characters and not bring them together? I don't know. What do you guys think?
I know what I was just going to say about the whole Suicide Squad thing. I think I might have been the first person to write that down, but I just think it's not about the government controlling anybody. It's about the fact that if you are a bunch of damn monsters who have been hunted since the beginning of time, and the only reason why you always damn lose is everybody gangs up against you and whoops your ass and drives you into the mountains, why wouldn't you seek out these other wondrous things and see if there was some sort of coalition or something, or I don't know, as a story thing? I know why you wouldn't do it in real life, because you're a damn monster without a telephone. So I get why you wouldn't do it in real life, but for story purposes, if I was part of a persecuted tribe of super beings, I would try to find them and see if we could smash up these humans. But I get why that's unwieldy for us to do as one big movie. But I also get why
that is interesting.
But I also,
think about this, Ed. I mean, what you're basically describing is, what if Dracula was Thanos and the other monsters were the Infinity Stones? And it becomes this quest of like the one amongst them who actually has like the reason and the mental capacity to say, no, we should be better, we should be privileged, goes about trying to assemble all of these forces in a bid for power or whatever it is.
And anding that, I think the reason why I thought of that, I always thought of Dracula as the central villain, but not somebody you would know as the central villain the whole time. Because Dracula is so charming, he can present as, hey, man, I'm just like y'all. Hey, green dude with the bolts in your neck, man, you persecuted just like me. I'm a handsome nobleman who's super rich and has a bunch of servants, but I get your plight. You know what I mean? Like Billy was talking about Trump earlier. The ultimate fake populist is Dracula, because he drinks people's blood and he takes their experience into him and he assimilates with them and he can speak their language, but he is not them because he's a damn creature of the night who's a parasitic monster. So that,
and he's got weird hair too, just like Trump.
So that being the case, Dracula making an undead or unwieldy weird army to like use as foot soldiers in the daytime where you can't go to conquer some world or whatever, and then they get wise to it and go, wait a minute, we're working for Satan. Now we're bad, but we're not that bad. Or so, I don't know. Maybe that's too much, but I just, I
guess for me, like the team up of all of them, it almost just sounds like a joke. Like a werewolf, a mummy, and a Frankenstein walk into a bar. Like it doesn't, the parts are so disparate that I feel like in my mind, and maybe this is our job, is I see the individual movies being really personal and very much within the like the serious tone and kind of like really getting to the human emotion of it. And then that all just kind of falls by the wayside to do this like, but really now we're going to do the Avengers of Monsters, which to me just like kind of is a very tonally different to me than the individual stories. Go ahead.
I would just posit very quickly that A, that is our job, and B, again, how many times in the modern era do we have to see these movies fail? How many times do we have to see the werewolf is one of the most interesting damn things. I know it's my favorite, but it just is. It's so damn interesting. I haven't seen an interesting werewolf thing since like The Howling, maybe. American Werewolf in London. This is 30 years.
Let's start with that. Why do you think the Wolfman is interesting? What is it that when you think about the Wolfman, what's the most interesting thing to you?
It's everything that you want. You want to be superhuman. You want to have no fear in that deep forest. You want to be the baddest thing in the forest. Oh, but also you can't control yourself and you might kill your wife and your dad. You know,
by the way, I think that applies to all these characters, though. They're all curse narratives to a certain degree. It's like you get wish fulfillment of superpowers and fearlessness and all that you said, but in all cases, you are a horrible monster that has no place anywhere in the world. I think that applies to Frankenstein. I think that applies to Frankenstein almost doubly, because if you're Dr. Frankenstein, you literally have wielded power over death. I mean, you've solved the ultimate problem, but in doing so, you create something horrific. And if you're the monster, you are super strong, superhuman, never gonna die. And in some version, the original version, you have human level intelligence, but you're so horrifically disgusting, you can't live anywhere with anybody. Yeah. That thread runs through all of these. It's wish fulfillment tinged with not only body horror, but sort of sociological horror. Yeah. Tinged with like, the world will not abide this.
Okay, so let's go through each character and try to decide what's cool about each character and how we want to tell that story, right?
Before we jump into that, Ron, I do want us to think, because it's going to impact the decisions we make. I want us to think about, do we want to make a team up movie? Do we want this all to build to something intentionally or not? And I think that is a big question. And Billy, you were talking about the Avengers of monster movies feeling like a joke. I totally understand that. But then I agree with Ed that I think it is our job to figure out, can you even do that without it feeling like a joke? And I just want to bring up two things, and they're actually written by the same guy. So Warren Ellis, who we've discovered is problematic, but is one of the greatest living comic book writers. He is the showrunner and writer behind Castlevania on Netflix, which does an amazing job of making Dracula a horrible, inhuman, bloodthirsty monster that should not by any means win, but also sympathetic. I think that's instructive that you can do that. And then number two, Warren Ellis wrote a series called Planetary in the late 90s. And it achieved this synthesis of all these different worlds by sort of positing as its story, as its through line, the discovery of like the hidden nooks and crannies of the Victorian world. This idea that there is a world that we know that's in our history books, and underneath that, there's all this awful, horrible crap that people like Sherlock Holmes and like the main character of the book, Elijah Snow, are dedicated to sort of keeping under wraps, of trying to make sure that it doesn't spill out and damage the real world. And again, I think it's just a really effective narrative for how to fit all these disparate parts into the same whole. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with either of those things, Castlevania or Planetary, but I think that they provide blueprints for what we're trying to do here in a way.
Yeah, and also just to yes and that part, I just think it's one of these things where you find yourself building a bunch of movies with a bunch of human characters when the moneymakers are these people. These guys are super co-stars to the point of being Michael Keaton in the second Batman movie. They're barely in their own movies because they're so unknowable. And I just think us trying to know them is the larger, harder screenwriting task to me.
Ron, I want to go back to what you were talking about, which is what is cool about each of these characters. And the thing that jumps out to me right away is that you have two characters in this milieu with agency, right? Of the monsters themselves. I think the Mummy is mindless. Frankenstein is fairly mindless. Creature from the Black Lagoon, inhuman. But Dracula and the Wolfman are two characters who are both cursed, who have totally opposite reactions to the curse. The Wolfman wants to get rid of it, is horrified that it's happening to him. And Dracula completely embraces it and tries to use it to gain power. And so right away I start to see there's the inklings of a conflict on which you can build a movie right there, in my opinion.
Okay.
I don't know. Any thoughts? Is any of this making this feel less overwhelming to you guys, or does it all still feel like an exercise in futility?
Well, I mean, are we still trying to decide whether we're going to turn this into an Avengers type thing where we do single movies and then one big movie at the end that brings them together for some reason? Or are we just going to do single movies? And if that's the case, then we need to just start talking about each movie and get into it. But let's decide that right now.
Yeah, well, to answer that question for me, I won't say that I'm super gung ho on the Suicide Squad or whatever the hell you want to call it, a team up movie, but I will say the only reason why the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen sucked is because it sucked. As a comic book, it was good.
Yep.
Stephen Norrington directed the non-hell out of that movie. It was basically poorly acted by everybody, including Sean Connery that was about to retire. They forced Tom Sawyer into there. They put cars in there. It was fantastical enough to have the Nautilus from Captain Nemo in there and all this different stuff. And Invisible Man was a spy and a sociopath, and Agatha Harkness or whatever had vampire powers, which she kind of has in the book. But they screwed it up. Just because they screwed it up doesn't mean we would, if we chose to do that, is all I'm saying about that.
Okay. Billy Business, your opinion?
I'm just not interested in the team up whatsoever. I feel like it undercuts what you could really emotionally accomplish in their own movies. That being said, I will not derail this episode if that's the choice that we make. But personally, look, we are four different people with four very different tastes. My taste is just, I don't like the idea of the team up movie. And I think that's maybe where Universal keeps trying to get it right and they keep failing, is that they keep trying to build to something that ultimately is the Winchester house. It just goes nowhere. But if we want to try, if we want to build the staircase to nothing, then I'm there.
Did you? Oh, Winchester House. I thought you were talking crap about Supernatural. I was about to get mad, but now
relax.
Yeah, don't get your Supernatural back up.
Take Misha Collins off of your speed dial. I'm not saying anything about Supernatural.
Look, I'm not saying he doesn't text me or anything like that.
Just to put a point on why I don't think we're fighting. I think the reason why this isn't a Twilight fight or a Matrix fight is that personally, I think the dissonance between the reason why Universal keeps failing is they try to make a whole ass mummy movie before they build to something. I really think that's really what it is. They did 1890s werewolf movie. Werewolf was like slicing people's whole arms off. The special effects were fantastic. He fights Anthony Hopkins. Two werewolves, one of whom is Benicio del Toro, one of whom is Anthony Hopkins, have a title fight at the end. And it sucks. It sucks. They tried so hard to. Can
I tell you why I disagree with you? It's because they didn't make a whole ass mummy movie, and that was the problem with Tom Cruise's mummy movie, is that it was not a whole ass mummy movie. You throw in Jekyll and Hyde, and you start to put those pieces in already, and the story gets muddled because the parts are so disparate that it just doesn't make sense, and nobody gets the payoff that they deserve. So that's why, in my mind, I absolutely think that it's trying to mix all these components together. It's chocolate syrup on a piece of pizza. I love both of those things. I don't think that they go well together, and I think that's where you're just going to keep hitting your head against the wall, is trying to make these really cool pieces all try to fit together when it just, a lot of them just thematically don't even work together.
And I'm saying, you know how chocolate tastes. We have tasted the thousands of Bavarian chocolates of Dracula and the thousands of Bavarian chocolates of werewolves. And these days, people don't like the old Romanian chocolate of Dracula by itself anymore. He's villains in movies. There hasn't been a successful Dracula on his own movie. That last one they made, they told a superhero story with Dracula, and people still didn't like it. They did a whole ass movie explaining all of his motivations, giving him superpowers, saying that he sacrificed himself for his people to become a cursed superhero like Batman and Dark Knight in the Dark Knight. You know what I mean? They did everything they could to make that one movie good. And it failed because people said, Dracula, seen it. But what you
I just think that was a bad piece of chocolate.
Anybody.
Like that's crappy chocolate, honestly, because that's not what Dracula is.
It's that chocolate you buy at the weird mom and pop grocery store that turns out to be 7 years old. You open it up and you start to take a bite and you're like, oh man, I got this.
I think Invisible Man, if anything, showed that the right take on a concept of what these monsters are, people will 100% be there and be all for it, because I think Invisible Man should have on paper been the dumbest one out of all of them, and somehow they made it relevant and straight to that story, which is again why I think we all agreed that Invisible Man shouldn't even be a part of this, is because that story stood on its own. So when you talk about a universe, my instinct is this all happens within this same world, and people are aware of these events, and maybe even those events inspire maybe the events of a Creature of the Black Lagoon is what even gets this guy to think about creating Frankenstein's monster. But to try to manufacture them to all be on screen at the same time, this is the last time I will say it, and then I swear I will move on, I think is a huge mistake, and I think that's where these things keep going wrong.
Bill?
I will now rest my case.
Bill, we didn't hear your opinion on that.
I feel like we're not. I feel like everybody is a little bit boxed in their thinking, because just having all the characters in one movie doesn't mean it has to be League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. You know what I mean? Like putting all these characters in the same movie doesn't mean that they are the 5 protagonists of a movie in which they are fighting something. I don't think that works. I think that would be a mistake, unless it's a comedy. But you can also create a movie where all 5 of these characters fit into the logic of the story. And I also agree with Ed, or maybe Ed and Billy were agreeing with each other. I also don't think the solution is what they did in The Mummy. Make us care about Tom Cruise, the human character, create your version of S.H.I.E.L.D., and that's the connective tissue that connects everything. I think that's kind of BS too.
I agree with that assessment. I think that was 100%. Me and Billy agreeing. That was me and Billy doing the Predator.
Sometimes our fights sound eerily close to our agreements, by the way.
But I guess what I'm saying is if we look at each one of these characters on a very fundamental level, like what is this story about and what makes it interesting, I still think there's opportunity to cross-pollinate in a way that is not as passive as what Billy is suggesting, where it's like, oh, Dr. Frankenstein read about this humanoid creature, and so he got the idea to create a Frankenstein monster. It can be more active. It can actually be these characters interacting in a way. Bottom line.
I get I get what you're saying. I 100%. And look, maybe that's what it is. Let's go back to something you guys have been talking about since the very beginning. Maybe Dracula is the big bad and everyone knows it. And some of these monsters are an attempt, so Frankenstein's monster maybe was an attempt at a super soldier to try to stop him. That ended up blowing up in its face. Someone else maybe is like, well, I heard this urban myth that there's maybe a monster in this lagoon that we can, maybe all these monsters are an attempt to stop another one. Again, I don't love it, but that's a starting point, at least to try to. I agree, though. I just don't think that they should all be protagonists against, or someone goes against the 5 of them. I think them teaming up is very Batman 66, and I think that's the thing that gives me pause.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I don't see them in some locker room with, Frankenstein having taped up over this locker and Dracula over this locker, and they're just sort of toweling off. Yeah, that was a great battle that we, I don't.
Space Jam 2.
Space Jam 2, Monsters Attack.
I'm now starting to see something that you guys are talking about where it reminds me of, so if we have Dracula as the first movie and him sort of settling himself within the world as a threat, I guess, and maybe also including the Wolfman. Now, is the Wolfman a curse that was put upon them, or is it a curse that he seeks out thinking to beat to be able to fight off Dracula? Maybe Dracula's into his lady. I don't know. I'm just throwing out ideas there. Because if each character is a response to Dracula, let's say,
I don't know that
each movie is like that. I don't know.
But even that feels like Dracula. I mean, Dracula should be pretty everything that Dracula does is secretive, right? Like Dracula's not like showing up on the steps of Parliament in London being like, now I am conquering you, I
was
guess
wondering if maybe he was doing that. I don't know.
It's hard to do stuff like that when you sleep 15 hours a day, though.
Well, it also
that's
the point where this movie starts to feel like Resident Evil, where it's like, we're going to take horror tropes and turn them into a post-apocalyptic dystopian action movie. And we can't do that.
No? Okay.
Maybe we can.
Well, I think what we're all struggling against is trying to make a smart version of this because none of us have ever seen it.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the hard part. I mean, obviously there's been great versions of Dracula, but I don't think I've seen a truly intelligent one of any of these movies, frankly. And the one that I saw, the Frankenstein movie where they let him be smart, I was thinking also, I don't know why we wouldn't explore a little bit of smart Frankenstein in this, because the Robert De Niro Frankenstein that was pretty smart, I think that's beautiful because it's like, you never expect him to be smart. So you're constantly surprised by him. And somebody like that could get the drop on somebody like Dracula because they think he's just a dumb asshole when he's really the strongest. He's like the Incredible Hulk. He might be the smartest one there is as well as the strongest. Just throwing that out there. Why we might not have to have dumb Frankenstein or not have to be dumb the whole time.
This is an interesting conversation because even with what you just said, Ed, like you're still thinking about the Frankenstein monster as being some kind of a protagonist by casting him in the Hulk role, right? And I guess maybe I'm just going to bring this up. I'm not pushing for anything, but if you look at every one of these stories in its purest form, there is at least one human character who is the hero. All of the monsters are the bad guys. In the Dracula story, you have Jonathan Harker, Mina Harker, and Van Helsing all fighting Dracula. In Frankenstein, you have Dr. Frankenstein, who is a tragic hero doomed by his own hubris, but it is his story. In the Wolfman, the cursed man is the hero, and it's the Jekyll and Hyde thing where his alter ego is the villain. In the Mummy, it's the explorers who are opening the tomb that are your hero. And then in the Creature from the Black Lagoon, it's the girl who gets kidnapped and the guy who goes after her. So there's these characters I would say almost don't work as heroes. They don't work as protagonists.
No, I just want to make it very clear though. You can be a protagonist without being a hero as well. And I just think the Frankenstein monsters and most of the best stories that I've read, he's not a hero or a protagonist, but he is what humanity, and I think he should be what humanity would call a villain because he's a monster. But when you really think about it, he didn't do anything bad. In some of the versions, he throws the little girl in the water because he thinks she's a daisy. He doesn't really understand that she won't float like the daisies, that she doesn't know how to swim. So he kills the little girl and the villagers come after him. Most of the problems he does in most of the movies are more sympathetic than I would have him. Most of the stuff that I like is Frankenstein's monster rather going, you made me, you won't make me a mate. You think I'm a dumb asshole who's just part of your plan, but I'm my own person and I'm going to kill you. And we're going to have this fight on an ice floe. You know what I mean? I have agency and I'm a monster, but I'm only a monster because you don't choose to let me be a person. You know what I mean? So I don't want him to be like, my secret is I'm angry all the time and give him some hero moment. Not at all. But he's only a villain because he's not a person.
Well, and I think he's only a villain because he's persecuted so much, right? I mean, if they let Frankenstein live with them, he'd just be like cooking breakfast and like hanging out if he could. He'd probably have to get a job. You know what I mean? But he can't do that because everybody wants to kill him the second they see him. And they're like, get this gross, disgusting thing out of my face. And, that's how ugly people are treated, guys. That's how ugly people are treated. And
but even if he is a monster that kills people and stuff, he still can't integrate into society. So it doesn't really matter whether he's a good guy or a bad guy. Even if he has murderous intent, even if he's a total psychopath who thinks that anybody who cuts him off in traffic, I don't know what medieval traffic he's getting into around the palace gates, but he would be the type of person who would maybe throw you over a castle because you slighted him some kind of way. Because he's not a person, he's a monster,
I'm starting to think we should have tried to do this where instead of doing the entire Universal Monsters, we should have done each movie. But let's
picked a movie because, like I said, we seem to think that making a movie
or Frankenstein.
But I'm just saying, we seem to think that making a movie out of any of these characters would be easy, and I posit that it isn't because people haven't been able to do it for 70 years. Is all I'm saying.
My argument against that would be that I think one of the reasons why that's the case is all of these stories are so well known at this point that just trying to retell the story is boring as hell. I mean, really, there's nothing about the Frankenstein story that you don't know. And there's nothing about the Dracula story that you don't know. And I would say there's nothing about the Wolfman story that you don't know. And the other thing...
Oh, go ahead, Bill. Keep going.
No, the other thing that's interesting too is like they're all linked by this very simple desire on all these characters' parts for love. And again, I think the Mummy is a little bit the outlier here, but like all of these characters, it's what Ed was saying. Like, I want to be loved. And because I'm a monster, the way that I go about looking for your love makes you horrified of me. And I didn't really mean it, but you're going to cast me out of society anyway, sort of a thing. Like, so they're all kind of the same story is what I'm trying to point out.
Right. So, okay, this is a half of a kernel of an idea, but it's at least trying to think of other angles. What if this is a movie? Now I'm taking it back to one movie. What if this is a movie and it's like a novelist, a journalist, it's someone. And all of these stories are exactly that. They're stories. They're stories of a guy who invented his own monsters. There's stories of something living in the lagoon. There's even stories of a guy who turns into a werewolf, and that's why all those people are disappeared. And it's like someone trying to uncover that there are monsters in the world. Yes, I see the finger.
I'm sorry. I need to jump. What you're saying, yes to all that. The main characters are a group of women who are all being stalked by these monsters. And nobody believes them. And so they come together to try to prove what you're saying, that these monsters exist, and to help each other kill the monsters. What if you take the object of their affections? You take Mina Harker and the little girl that Frankenstein wants to be friends with, and the Wolfman's wife. And it's like you create your characters as a group of women who are all on the run from the monsters. A
support group that fights back.
Yeah, exactly.
I like this. I like this.
That's pretty interesting because these people are the only ones who believe each other. These people are the only ones who actually have the reason. Like, oh yeah, well, I fought off my husband one time, took a bunch of holy water and a bunch of punji sticks, and I dug a moat and stuff, but I got him off of me, and then I had to move to Utah. Or whatever.
By the way, what was the most effective part of that Invisible Man movie? It was the Elizabeth Moss character and her struggle and performance. Make the whole Universal Monster franchise hinge on that.
That's kind of where my brain was at. It's like maybe we're thinking about it from the wrong perspective. The other way to me is at least more interesting because I also like the idea of like, the story. And I like the idea of like the story of these things exists, but what do they actually end up being like? Does the creature from the Black Lagoon, does it even look like the Black Lagoon? But that's the story that we know. You know what I think you know where I'm trying to go with this.
And also as a yes, and they don't all have to be female either. A couple of them definitely have to be, but people gather together because Batman broke their brother's hip. People gather together because a drunk driver killed their family, frankly. So why wouldn't people try to find each other if they went through these things that nobody even believes? You know what I mean? If the creature from the Black Lagoon took my girlfriend under the water and they found her bloated and drowned a few days later, and
you'd probably be on the run. You'd be on the run because they would think it was you. So one guy's trying to clear his name. One girl's trying to escape from, the Wolfman because she's like, and they're like, oh, so your boyfriend like beats you. Like he can't. I don't think he can help it. You know what I mean? Oh, I think everyone has their own take of why these monsters are after them. And then
at the end, they realize that they've got to get the monsters to fight each other. And then we have a giant friggin' brawl at the end. Because the only way to have Dracula killed.
That's called Hancocking a movie, where you have 2/3 of a great movie and then you fart out the worst outcome possible.
Hey, this is the best, and I'm going to argue this. I think that I'm not going to argue it. I think it's great, but I don't care. But I do love that this is. We're finally going somewhere, you guys. I feel like we achieved Reboot it already, but let's keep going.
Well, this could be a multi-film franchise, by the way.
Yeah.
And there's almost shades of Old Guard, that Charlize Theron Netflix movie, where it's like, if your entry into it is who is the most recent victim who has nowhere to turn, nobody believes them, they're being stalked by this horrible supernatural evil. And by the way, Billy, I still love the idea that like these things aren't quite what you think they are, because there's the stories have sort of metastasized into
right.
So there's a great series of revelations as you go down the road of like the first actual encounter with the thing, and how is it different and how is it the same as the legend. But the idea that like you start from who is the most recent victim, and in their desperation they end up falling in with, I don't know if it's an organized group, or I don't know if you want it to feel a little bit more
I kind of the organized group to me just is a pinch too like shieldy, which is what I didn't like about the Mummy. I do like the idea though of like, look, if I witness something and no one believes me except one person's like, hey, I know everyone thinks you're crazy, but I had something similar too. That to me feels more personal. It feels more organic. And I like the idea that like the whole world is almost against these people. Like, it's probably too cliche to do this, but I was even thinking like, what if like, you know, they're in therapy groups, or one of them's even in like an insane asylum. Like, I have tried so hard to convince myself through therapy that what I witnessed wasn't true. And now you're coming saying maybe you saw the same thing or something similar to me. You know, I kind of feel like that's more, that to me hits better than like, oh, Nick Fury came and told me that, yes, this is true, and now we have to get it, you know?
Yeah. I'm not trying to throw this off by anything, but it's crazy that the way what you guys are talking about is literally how conspiracy theories start. It literally, that's exactly
relevant, by the way.
That's exactly I'm actually throwing in that this whole movie could be a metaphor about conspiracy theories, and the danger.
I think Bill hit it on the head earlier about talking about Planetary and stuff. The secret cryptography. People think of like, oh, I'm going to go hunt Bigfoot. No, what if Bigfoot killed people every fortnight? It would have a different, you know, feel to trying to find Bigfoot. What if Bigfoot was older than time and secretly the possessor of most politicians, you know, because he's been alive for millennia? That would be a different thing than, ooh, Loch Ness Monster. You know what I mean? What if Loch Ness Monster was the head of the freaking Illuminati and raising an undead army? It would hit different, is what I'm saying. Yeah. So I think the hidden history of the world is something I'd love to explore. I think that's great.
Is this set in the modern day, or is this in a more antique time?
I'm voting modern, but that's up to. I'm also.
I also vote modern. I think one of the great things about The Invisible Man was that they took the concept of Invisible Man and updated it to something that makes more sense. Like, for me, I definitely think if you're going to build a body based off of other people's dead body parts, like, to me it's you know, Frankenstein maybe becomes even more like technological. It becomes more robotic, more AI than maybe what, you know, the old version is. But I think definitely updating those kind of stories. But also too, it's like, I just love the idea of like, if someone was like, draw me what you think Frankenstein's monster looks like based on the stories, and you show it and it looks just like the Frankenstein we know, and then we see the actual monster, and it's like, I love the idea of like how history and how the game of telephone changes the perspective, so that when we see it, like, oh, I can kind of see where maybe that got exaggerated, or that just wasn't there at all. Someone added that detail, but this is what we're talking about. And I kind of love that idea of like, you know, what would a realistic Frankenstein's monster look like in 2020 if you found out that, oh, did you know that's not just a story someone wrote? Like, that's a real thing.
I think part of that becomes something for us to discuss is Frankenstein and Creature from the Black Lagoon are extraordinarily sci-fi concepts within their horror.
Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, Dracula, Wolfman, and the Mummy are extraordinarily magic.
Yeah.
And so if there's one thing that it becomes hard to reconcile with, like, what are we, looking at the truth behind the legend of it all, how much magic are we willing to allow? How much?
That's an Ed Grier question. Ed, how much magic will you allow us to use?
Okay, well, Dracula is the product of 18th century super soldier experiments. And no,
hey, by the way, Nazi super soldier Dracula, I'm down with.
But that's what I'm saying. Like little stuff like there are scientific reasonings for these things that we don't understand, and it doesn't help them not be monsters. It doesn't help them not be scary to us. It doesn't demystify anything about them. Once we find out that you're a technological marvel rather than a weird arcane lightning struck you thing, that doesn't make you less scary when you're throwing a Volkswagen through my door.
I think that's what I was trying to get across with the Frankenstein's monster thing is like, it's more believable to me if like half of it is, the brain's dead. So the brain is actually an advanced AI in his head. You know what I mean? Like there are reasons that we could maybe stretch your imagination, but it's like, okay, I'll buy that for the sake of this. The Mummy is the only one where I'm like, we'd have to figure out some way to reconcile that.
Well, so Billy, what do you see as being the, like, if Frankenstein was just sort of a weird genetic, like cyborg experiment, right? Why? What's the rationale behind Dr. Frankenstein? Is it the same story then?
I don't know. To me, like I always thought that the Frankenstein's monster, could have been more personal. You're gonna laugh, but that's what I always kind of loved about Frankenweenie was that like it's this kid's dog. It's like he has a connection to it. So why wouldn't Frankenstein be trying to build his dead son, his dead brother? Why would it not be a character that he already like loves and knows that he's trying to bring back?
Dude, and just a yes and that, just real quick. I think that it would be a perfect way to gender swap and have like maybe Dr. Frankenstein himself was a big old oaf of a man and he dies in the middle of trying to make some super soldier bionic whatever experiment, and his wife can't take that he's dead. And is like Marie Curie and her husband. I know her, not her other damn husband, because she's a scientist, right? So she's a scientist. He's a scientist. Her scientist husband dies. She takes some of his old notes, looks with her own research, rebuilds him imperfectly, and maybe dies for her trouble. And maybe he's like mad that like, I killed my wife. I got to rebuild it. Now I don't know how to do it. And that's one of like an internal quest that he has. I don't know. Just like,
well, I think if you do that, then his wife could absolutely be part of this group of survivors, however they end up becoming, where it's like, she's the one who has answers, right? Like she's sort of the mentor figure.
Mm-hmm. Like she just barely gets away and she's scarred. She's the half man, as they say in the screenplay stuff. She's the half man, the one scarred from this arcane world. Okay, loving it.
Also, then, if you're saying that the monster that she rebuilds has some of like the actual Dr. Frankenstein's intelligence and personality left, he could, in like a weird, third clone and multiplicity sort of way, come up with the idea of resurrecting other people or things in his life. Like he could create the Wolfman. You know what I mean?
You had me at multiplicity, Bill.
So maybe what we're talking about here is a chain of events where like the Frankenstein research comes from Dracula, who really was like a Nazi science experiment or a 1920s science experiment gone wrong, and he escaped into the hills of Bavaria. And then that research is preserved, and Dr. Frankenstein uses it to try to create new life, and he dies. His wife resurrects him, and then that monster tries to do his own thing, but because he's so screwed up in the head, like he creates the Wolfman.
Oh, and I think one of the failed experiments is definitely the creature from the Black Lagoon, and they threw it into the lagoon thinking it was dead, and it is not dead.
Right? Yeah.
Maybe, and honestly, I mean, I've always liked this. Maybe the curse of the mummy is the one bit of actual magic in this story. That maybe that's your third act thing, is suddenly there is an almost Lovecraftian like the dead rise.
Well, this could also, it could go with what this whole thing is, which is messing with things you shouldn't be messing with, right? And maybe the survivors think, well, the only way to battle these technological, freaks is to use magic. And so they actually seek out something to do that and accidentally release the mummy, and then it backfires on them.
I don't hate that. I don't hate that maybe one of the people that they come across is like, we could try to fight fire with fire, and it ends up, the
maybe
mummy,
the group is like,
because to me the mummy was the mummy was always the monster that was like almost indiscriminate. It was like, I don't care if you're the good guy or the bad guy, I am beyond that,
Yeah, that's what I always loved about that. Is it's more of a force of nature, right? Like the mummy is just the personification of what Ron's talking about, of like trespassing where you do not belong, messing with things you don't understand.
Dude, but also one thing, just I don't want to make it science, but there's been so many things posited about how ahead of us and ahead of many different people the Aztecs and the Egyptians were, and certain racists, I'll use the R word, say that it's aliens. I'm not saying it's aliens. I'm saying racists say that it's aliens. I am just merely positing that perhaps some scientists from way back in the days made the very first proto version of all of these monsters that we're talking about, save the Lagoon guy and the Wolfman. Most of these deal with the other side, dying, being able to preserve yourself after you're dead, being able to resurrect dead bodies. What the hell is mummy crap about? The same thing, taking your wealth with you, being able to rise from the dead to avenge your stuff. I have no problem thinking that some sort of arcane science that is like unto magic, especially for those ancient people who made it up, some part of the people who are digging up these other things are using, some weird version of mummy technology, and that's why it gets better and better over time.
Look, I'll just allow that just because it makes Ed feel less uncomfortable with magic.
I actually really like that idea. Like, not even playing. I really like the idea that's like, yeah, maybe this all started with the Egyptians trying to outsmart death with everything that they knew at the time, and that's how fine. Because it actually does connect like beautifully. Look, I'm the reiterator. Yeah. It connects beautifully to everything you just said.
And the only caveat I would have is I want to make sure, I just want to make sure that the first movie that we're talking about here is not some globe-trotting adventure. Because I think that that's where trying to turn these movies into like fun adventure romps misses a lot of that personal horror that we were talking about, that I think is inherent in the idea of like a group of survivors. And oh my God, what was I the target of? I don't even know. It was something too horrible. So
we don't go to Egypt. That's the only thing we got to change. Or when the mummy comes back, he comes out of a museum or something. I don't know, or some sacred place where people. I mean,
I kind of feel like a little bit more in line with what you're saying, Bill, is like, if we're trying to plan out that maybe this is, it expands to more movies, but this first one, I almost want to sell on the idea of like, are these people even like, is this real? Like, are they, did that really happen to them? Are these things they're talking about really real? And as an audience member, we're really trying to figure out like, what did attack them? And then we realize like, oh, like I know these monsters. And by the end of the first movie, now we're ready to step into kind of like maybe the bigger mythology of all of this.
There's an interesting structure to be had where if your main character, they kind of did this in the Tim Burton Sleepy Hollow movie with the Johnny Depp character, where if your main character is an investigator of some kind, that's an easy route to start putting these survivors in the same place. And especially if at the end of Act 1, your skeptical investigator has an encounter with one of these creatures. And then it becomes, the whole first movie could be, I just need to try to escape. And like, I realize that these stories I'm hearing are real and I need to make some sense of it. Then you get into a movie 2 or a movie 3 where this bigger mythology of like the quest to destroy death becomes the overriding story. Mm-hmm. But I think you start it in that small way of like, there are survivors of horrible, inexplicable things. Can we explain them? And where does that lead us?
I mean, we basically just repitched a version of the X-Files, which I'm 100% on board with.
Dude, but that's I think that's interesting because, like what you said, though, let's say, what if Scully, for lack of a better word, Scully goes on a case and it just gets so weird that she can't even work for the X-Files anymore. Like, the X-Files are literally dedicated to wrapping up loose ends, but as soon as she finds a really loose end, they go, bitch, you are crazy. Get the hell out of here. And now she's got all these resources, all this intelligence, but she's the crazy one. And now we don't have her having to report back to the damn FBI or none of that crap. She's a lone crazy person, like Jack McGee, the guy who used to trail the Hulk across the country in the old Incredible Hulk series. Just a real true believer.
But I think you treat this with the reverence of a true detective. I think the tone is true detective, where it's like the fact that these monsters exist is almost like almost the twist in a weird way, where it's just like, wow, this felt so guttural. This felt so like, we've used Prisoners as an example already, but kind of that feel, that true detective, that Prisoners, that true like gross crime. And then you find out like, whoa, this isn't just like a serial killer. This is like a true literal monster.
I just have, in that vein, Billy, I have to pitch a character. It's like the sister of the girl who was drowned by Frankenstein, but she's like 55 and like has PTSD.
Totally.
And like that's one of the characters that you meet.
I love that movie so much. Yeah.
And I love the idea that, like, we recently did an interview with an author I really like, who in his books, he tells the storytellers are within the actual book telling a different story that's part of the book. I know that sounds crazy, but that's kind of what we're doing here, is each character is telling their story through the detective, kind of, right?
Yeah, which is a little bit of what they did in True Detective, like with the time jumping of it all. You're sort of getting, it's a little bit Rashomon. Like, I don't think it should be as framed as Rashomon, where it's like technically the entire movie is happening in the interrogation room and you're just getting nothing but flashbacks as the people are talking.
Yeah.
I don't like that structure because it feels too safe. It feels like, all right, well, at the end of the day, I know everybody gets out of it because they all end up in the interrogation room, and the only twist is who's telling the truth.
Exactly.
Like, don't do that.
Yeah.
Right.
But you can have elements of it.
Yeah. And also, I would say also there's the Wolfman's wife. I would like to pitch her as a character where like there are just, and this is just one dumb thing I thought of that might be able to happen to her. Like, what if she got committed because she just felt like, look, I am never going to be safe. And I also think there's one thing about the Wolfman. I think the Wolfman kills everybody to get to his wife. I think he can smell her on the wind, you know what I mean, type of thing. And he has this preternatural gift to get to her. But it isn't. But he's always just short of killing her because there's some part of him, not like a hero stopping him from doing it, but there's some part of him doesn't want to do it. But he always gets to her, and her in the meeting with the guys explaining. And then she's like, well, can you give me a ride to the bus stop? And then the werewolf attacks them. And it's just very clear that one of them's real, at least. This bitch ain't lying. Yes to all that. And even more horrific, she has absolutely no relationship to the werewolf. Just in the werewolf's mind, he just targeted this. Like, it's just total happenstance in very slasher movie sort of way. This horrible creature has just become obsessed with this woman for nothing she did.
I kind of like it. That's like the one part of Joker that I actually thought was effective, was that he made up that relationship in his mind. And I love if you take that element for the
I agree. That's a great change. I agree with that. I think that's dope.
And scary.
All right, so let's get into casting here, because I think we have an investigator. We have, the woman who's been haunted by her sister being killed by Frankenstein. We have the woman who's being hunted by the Wolfman. We need to have some sort of survivor of Dracula, and maybe it is like an old Mina Harker or an old Jonathan Harker or an old who was his familiar?
Renfro, I think. Renfield. Dude,
yes.
I got a pitch for Renfield. Renfield, I read a lot for Dracula for some reason, and one of the things Dracula says to Renfield is, and one of the conceptions of it, he says to Renfield, you will live as I live. You will live as long as I live, for my blood is within you. And my curse is your curse, and my gifts are your gifts to a certain extent. Some crap like that. So basically, he kept Renfield alive an inordinate amount of time. And that's why that dude is crazy as hell. This dude Renfield says he was born in 1875. All right, dog, whatever. And he's got all these sores all over his skin, and he doesn't like sunlight. Okay, whatever. Because he's not. Another thing, the most common new conceptions of Dracula is when he bites you, you become more or less a zombie. You're a piece of crap. You never get to be a beautiful glitter god that flies in the sky and romances Bella. You never get that. You're a dumb zombie, and I'm a superhuman being that gets to keep my own mind. That's the difference between Dracula and the rank and file vampires and the rest of the people who get bit, like Renfield, like all his familiars throughout history or whatever.
Again, if Dracula is a failed Nazi experiment to cheat death, then
that's true. That's true.
But no, I think everything you're saying could be real. Like within him, he has some sort of pathogen that zombifies people, and he's a cannibal. He just eats people. Like it's not about being beautiful and drinking blood. It's just he is a Nazi asshole who is a cannibal.
Yeah. It's not beautiful like sucking blood. It's horrific like being a super zombie. I love that too. And the history books, such as they are, would romanticize it or something, but it's not romantic. It's really horrible. And he's a Nazi, for Christ's sake. That's crazy.
All right, so should we do a little casting? I mean, we could talk about the monsters themselves, although it sounds like most of them are going to be under some heavy prosthetics. But we've got the investigator, we've got the survivor of Frankenstein, we've got the woman being stalked by the Wolfman, we've got an old Renfield who is some sort of weird half creature that Dracula's left behind. We could also have the guy whose woman was stolen by the creature from the Black Lagoon, if we want to go there. But who are these kind of who's this motley crew of victims that we're going to piece through in that true detective way? And then who's the person doing the piecing?
I think it'd be good for us to determine like who would be the investigator and which one of these characters who might make the star of the movie. Or
Are you guys? Do you hear that buzzing? Guys, we almost made it through.
I think Bill's pretending that his Zoom doesn't even work, so he doesn't have to listen to John Peters.
Gentlemen, hello. Happy Spooky Day. Trademark John Peters. I've given you the impossible task. There have already been so many great movies made. I don't know what else there is to do with these characters. And all I can tell you is this. No matter what you do with any of these other monsters, I need a super sexy bride of Frankenstein. I'm talking tattered clothes, big bosoms, nice hips. You know, a Peters type. You know what I mean.
Yeah.
So, all the other monsters can be horrible blood-sucking fiends. I don't care. But the bride of Frankenstein needs to get it up. You know what I'm saying? You understand what I'm laying down here?
Yes, we do.
It means I want to be aroused. Take care of that for me. And then send me the dailies, because I'll need them for my private collection. Goodbye.
I think we have a potential lawsuit on our hands here. So the question then becomes, okay, I really like the story that we came up for Dr. Frankenstein's wife kind of rebuilding him. Yeah. Why would she build him a wife? Unless she like kills herself and she's like, I want to be half dead and stupid too. I don't know why she would build him a companion that's not her.
No, but I think we're thinking about it wrong. I think Frankenstein draws that as a picture of what he wants to make his wife into. Since he's a monster and his thought process is so strange, he's like, baby, I'm glad I found you again. We can be together. All we got to do is make some subtle modifications. Look at this drawing I did. And he shows this grotesque, weird, big head, big boobs, ripped up She-Hulk looking monster thing. Look, babe, you can be like this. And she's like, no, I'm not going to let you rip my arms off to make me Evangeline Lilly or whoever you think is hot.
I mean, in a weird way, that's kind of a good reason why she would also, like, if she creates him and then she barely escapes, that's why he keeps coming after her, is because like, you did this to me. I want us to be together. You have to come to my level, essentially.
He has like some weird obsession with perfecting her.
Yeah.
But like, it's really horrible.
To make
but
him
that does
as
also
perfect,
mean
to make her as perfect as him.
Yeah, but the sexy woman then only exists in a drawing on paper. I don't know if Peters is going to like that.
Well, he
doesn't watch these movies. He doesn't watch them.
He asked for the dailies. He asked to watch the dailies.
Yeah, arguably, I have an idea where that could be taken care of.
I have an idea.
In
but
his
go
head.
ahead, Ron. No, I was gonna say,
AI,
what if?
Right?
Well, what if he does it to a victim? What if he's like, I can make you into this, and it's this beautiful, buxom young woman, because that's what we have to do. But kind of like, I'm thinking more like that scene in Batman '89 where he shows Vicky Vale at the museum and takes off the mask of Alicia, the girlfriend, and she's mutilated. He does that to another girl to be like, look, it's not perfect. I don't have it done yet, but this is what I'm thinking, essentially.
It's just a sketch, really.
I'm
That
the
is
first
right.
fully homicidal artist.
No, you know what, though? That could be the opening of the movie. Like, that woman feels like she's being stalked or whatever. She could be the one who initially gets in touch with our investigator, right? And when she gets killed or mutilated in this horrific way, that spins our investigator off being like, what is happening? Like, what is this?
That's great. And it's like this new serial killer who's like mutilating people and leaving very Silence of the Lambs-esque, you know?
And at the beginning, it can almost look like it's not a monster. It could look like just a horrible serial killer, crazy person.
Well, yeah, it's just this woman who feels like she's being stalked. And then when you find her body because she's been killed, it's like stitched together with other pieces of body parts and weird mechanical things, whatever. Like, it's Frankenstein-esque, but there's no indication of like horror movie monster just yet, because that's the first kill. That's the first act of the movie.
I love it.
100%.
Yeah,
Awesome.
that's great. I was also thinking of we got to cast a 55-year-old woman as the sister of that one lady, but I'd just like to throw out Aaliyah Shawkat as the investigator person. I saw her on Search Party. I saw her on Search Party, and in that whole series, she's trying to find out some mystery, but she's just some regular gal. And I would just love to see what she would do with actual, like, a little bit more Sculliness, a little bit more FBI imprinted onto that sort of millennial cool gal persona that she has. I just think she's great, and she can carry a movie, and she hasn't been given a chance. And damn it, I want to be part of giving her one.
I support that.
I love her, but I feel like just her whole sort of comedy persona cuts against the grain of the true detective sort of ultra gritty feeling that we're going for.
I'm telling you, man, it's Michael Keaton Batman casting. I just want her in the room, give her a pool cue, and let her fight against these buxom blondes that Peters is going to make us bring in. That's all I'm saying.
All right, that's a fair point. That's a fair point.
Sometimes those comedy to drama transitions are just what the doctor ordered, so I'm not going to rule it out.
And she doesn't seem particularly heroic. That is my main thing, because one of the main things that is wrong with all of these movies, they always have some lantern-jawed jerk be the person who's going to right every wrong. And in real life, there's a lot of women, a lot of minority women, solving a lot of stuff for us. And we give all the credit to some lantern-jawed guy from a Disney movie. And I just want to subvert that. But yeah, I also like to put forth Alicia Vikander as our Scully as well, because she does have that edge that I think you might be looking for from performances like in Ex Machina and stuff. She's got and Tomb Raider. She's got a little bit of an edge, but she reads as young and inexperienced as well.
Yeah, I totally feel that. It's weird. I'm with you 100% on the investigator being a woman. I would love to find somebody who combines the qualities of Alia Shawkat and Alicia Vikander, where it has sort of the edge and the presence of an Alicia Vikander, but with the weirdness and the quirkiness of Alia Shawkat. I don't know who that is, but it's like, yeah, you're circling a type.
My third one is Aubrey Plaza, who I think does that too.
Ooh.
Like she does the little bit of like, you would never believe that Aubrey Plaza believed that there were damn vampires and crap. I don't think. I think it'd be more like, you guys are dumb. This is dumb.
How about Kristen Ritter?
I don't know if Kristen Ritter carries a movie, but I see where you're coming from with that.
Yeah.
I like Kristen Ritter okay in regards to getting in the room. I think she might get ate up in the room, but I wouldn't be super opposed to putting her in the room.
Who was the one that played opposite Andy Samberg in the movie everyone was talking about all summer? Christina Malotti. Yeah. She's an interesting choice. I always feel like she kind of has the look, at least when we were talking about it, that's kind of the look that I had in my mind. Was I believe that she's experienced but also inexperienced at the exact same time. She may be too doe-eyed for some taste, but I think she could be good. And she
I got one outside the box, not outside the box for any good reason, but Danae Garai. I can never
from
her name.
Walking Dead and Okoye.
Now, yeah, because she's got a little bit of the experience of like, I've been in the FBI for probably 15, 20 years, and you guys throw me away because I tell you something you don't want to hear. Screw you. I'm going to make my own thing. I can see that in her face. I can feel that in her bones that she would do that she would have the fortitude to do that. And I totally buy her as an FBI agent. I really buy her as somebody of authority, or even a cop of authority type person, and a person who takes her authority with her, even if she gets fired. Yeah. I could see her. I kind of like that more than anything I've said, actually. And plus, people don't think that black people like any of this crap. And they think that we're very incredulous as far as all this stuff. So it would take a lot to convince this black woman that there's a bunch of damn monsters around.
Well, and I think then the question becomes, who is the woman then being stalked by the Wolfman that could be like the person, like after this initial Frankenstein murder happens, I think it almost becomes a two-hander between Denai Guerrera and whoever that woman is being stalked by the Wolfman as they go down this rabbit hole. I don't know why Lizzie Kaplan is an actress that I like, who I think she was the co-lead in Masters of Sex. She's been in a lot of things. But
I think I like her, if she's the one I'm thinking about.
She's got a great combination of like, you believe that she both would be like, I think she could play the scary, wide-eyed, like, oh my God, what is happening to me? But also has like, you would believe that she could get away and stay away from the Wolfman if she was so inclined.
Oh, and also one last thing. This Wolfman lady is Sarah Connor. I'm not saying as far as muscles and everything, but she's traumatized. She's born again hard. She lives in a new place every 2 weeks. You know, she knows the lunar cycle like the back of her hand. There's a lot of stuff that she'd have to, figure out to even stay alive. And her as a hard woman, that's got to be part of her character. And that's maybe why she gets along with the FBI agent so much.
I definitely agree with that. And so maybe I'm going to walk my Lizzie Kaplan back because I don't know if she plays as that. But I do think that the other piece of the Sarah Connor of it all is it is more Sarah Connor at the end of the original Terminator than in Terminator 2.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yes.
Interesting.
Maybe like an Eliza Dushku. She could, I don't know if she's a big enough name though.
Yeah. I also think, I think she'd be all right. She also has, like, the other piece of the Sarah Connor that I just want to temper what Ed was saying with is that she very much is like the girl next door. She very much is just like unassuming woman who would have been working as an accountant before all this crap happened to her. And that's the only, like, I don't know if Eliza Dushku has that quality, but maybe.
How about Michelle Rodriguez?
She's just the tiniest bit too tough.
She's hardcore.
Yeah, I don't think I would believe that obviously she's in danger from a superhuman wolf monster, but I don't think that I would feel the danger as much as, I think that's one reason why Elizabeth Moss works so good is like, she's great and I can see her being strong, But her having to deal with what she has to deal with in that movie, it seems so overwhelming that when she does it, you get a good payoff and satisfaction.
Yeah. I'm going to jump around a little bit for the Mrs. Frankenstein, who's sort of the half man, mentor character in the movie that has a lot of the information. Her name is flying right out of my head, but from the first season of The Boys, the executive with Vought.
Elizabeth Shue?
Elizabeth Shue from Adventures Babysitting. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
She could be the on the run from the monster Dr. Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit young, but also has a buxom quality. That
I guess that was the question I was going to ask. Like, how old? And because in my mind, I was skewing like Glenn Close. Like I was getting older, but I mean,
if Glenn Close wants to do our movie.
Well, but as who? The 55-year-old lady that is traumatized by her sister dying, or the woman who's running from?
No, I was saying she was the one. She was the one that turned her husband.
Oh yeah.
Into Frankenstein's monster. I was thinking older, but
I'm fine with that.
I would love having more than one older actress in this movie, so-called older. I would love for us to be leading that charge. So yes, Glenn Close can deliver all that. I think Glenn Close's character is going to get murdered horrifically as well. So I think we would give her a nice Robert Shaw scene of getting murdered after.
Dude,
because she has to pay for her crime.
Quint, we have to cast a female Quint. I think you're dead on with that. And which Glenn Close could absolutely do, but now that just totally changes my calculus of who I would want in that role. Who's a female Quint?
And because like there's so many, it's hard again, and this is a testament to how hard it is to remain a woman actress or a woman actor and still be considered for all these things. I mean, honestly, if we could get somebody even like Andy McDowell. Freaking I like Minnie Driver, somebody that looks like they could be a scientist lady, or even somebody like, I mean, Nicole Kidman looks and has a weird aura. I could see her being a weird bad person, honestly.
How about Helena Bonham Carter?
Too weird for my tastes.
It might be on the nose, but I could see her big doe eyes in the lab making stuff. That I don't know.
To me, that personally, I feel like she's so Burton now that that would feel hat on a hat at that point.
Sombrero on a fedora, with a ball cap twisted to the back on top of it.
I mean, you could also go more. Who was the woman in Hollywood? The Netflix series Hollywood. The woman who plays the casting director. She's a very venerable older actress. It might even be Vanessa Redgrave. I don't know why I can't come up with her name, but I'm just thinking like if you want to go like woman in her 70s, bringing back a kind of a screen icon in her twilight years, that's a way to go with the Dr. Frankenstein role as well.
Well, then we just get Judi Dench. We just say, look, here's the truck full of money. Come bring some gravitas to our monster movie.
It's not a bad idea.
Well, Judi Dench, Glenn Close,
Holland Taylor,
Vanessa Redgrave, all in a room with the pool cues fighting it out. I think that'd be fine.
Oh, that's a pay-per-view event, my friend. That's UFC 450 right there.
This just came to mind too. As the woman haunted by the Frankenstein encounter when she was younger, Jolie Richardson, who was just in The Color Out of Space as Nicolas Cage's wife. She was also the wife on Nip Tuck for a long time. She is a phenomenal actress and has that very kind of haunted, hollow look to her that I think could be amazing.
I know who you're talking about.
I have kind of a weird pick, but probably because she played a very similar kind of character earlier in her career. What about Bonnie Hunt as the sister of of this person, because I'm thinking of her role in Jumanji when she was just like, I am a traumatized adult from a traumatizing childhood thing. And definitely now I could see her playing that role of like, I've spent a lifetime trying to either ignore this or get the truth to this.
I mean, I think that works. And if that woman is Bonnie Hunt, then I think your Dr. Frankenstein has to be like a Vanessa Redgrave, like a woman in her 70s or 80s, because if the traumatized woman's sister was killed by Frankenstein and she was old enough to see it, then you know what I mean? Like Dr. Frankenstein would have had to have been an adult.
To me, the reason why it makes more sense to have someone like in their 70s or whatever to be Frankenstein's wife is, it makes more sense for Frankenstein to want to modify her to be younger and more buxom is because she's old, you know?
Totally.
Oh, and then she could take that as such a diss. Oh, that's
it's just such like it's such a meta commentary on how we so shittily treat women in Hollywood as they age anyway. You know,
honestly, I think that's what this whole movie is like all of these persecutions and the things that these women are going through are all metaphors for like misogyny, right? Like this movie is in a weird way kind of like a female exploitation movie, just with more gravitas than being like, you know, a hack 1970s exploitation.
And also, and to that, so let's cast the guy who ran into the Loch Ness Monster. The Loch Ness Monster stole his girlfriend or whatever, because I think him being like a Ed Asner in the room with these gals talking about all their trauma and just like, man, I'm on the run or whatever. I don't know, but this a guy energy, like putting a guy energy in there would give us some crackling scenes in between all the action to me.
I think it would have to be a younger guy just to fit in with like the Denai Guerrera.
I said Ed Asner as far as energy, not.
I've never heard Ed Asner used as like, you know, a guy's guy like Mel Gibson or Ed Asner. Like, what a weird pull, man.
And I was gonna say Craig T. Nelson. So I don't know.
Dear God, how old are we?
What a weird pull.
Oh, the guy's guy like Ted Danson. That's a young man with a head full of hair. That's natural.
You know, like Magnum PI.
All right. Who's
Tom Selleck? No, I was kidding.
Who's the man's man whose girlfriend got stolen by the creature from the Black Lagoon?
I was actually thinking of Liam Hemsworth, maybe. Like someone who, because I think part of what would make that so interesting is that it looks like a guy who probably would beat himself up that he couldn't defend his woman from being taken. And here he is, you know, cut and gorgeous looking, but completely helpless. I think that's kind of the
Rock.
But seeking, I love that part about seeking to like, and maybe that's probably why he dies in the movie, is he dies trying to save one of these ladies in some bullcrap chauvinist display of whatever. But at the same time, he's trying to make up for the fact of the woman that he didn't save. So he earns his death, but maybe he didn't need to die because he was just so male about it. But we give him his shot to do his thing and try to make up for his, you know what I mean? And somebody in this mug got to die besides old ladies to show that this world is dangerous as hell. So I would love, young, like maybe he was a military operator or something. Because that's the funny thing. He's like a Navy SEAL and an aquatic dude stole this woman.
Well, and I would argue
like that.
It's hardcore.
And I would argue that like a lot of these people's family members are going to die, because if these people are stalking them, they're going to track them down by finding family or friends and et cetera, et cetera. So people close to them are dying, and they have to figure out a way to get it to stop. It also gives them a reason.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think there's going to be a lot of collateral damage in the form of like police. And I mean, to your point, Ron, I think you want it to also be people that feel important to the main cast.
Exactly.
But yeah, I see this as very like gloves are off. Like people are dying horribly all throughout this whole series.
So let's say a Hemsworth brother or Ryan Gosling, somebody that we could put on the poster that gets yanked out from under the audience, and they're just like, what?
Yeah, pull a Psycho where you know Tippi Hedren dies in the first 20 minutes. Spoiler to Psycho, I guess.
No, I think that's it.
So who are we thinking about directors?
Oh man.
That's the big question is, it seems like just because we've talked about expanding this, but we're just talking about this first True Detective chapter, right?
Yeah, and if it goes well, then you give that person the next movie, and if not, then we pick somebody else. But yeah, I mean, this is a tightrope walk of tone because it's like, it's very much True Detective horror crime, but there's elements of sci-fi as we start to unspool some of these backstories. And then there's also the female empowerment angle where it's like, this has to be very sensitive to all these female leads and their various plights and troubles. Who was the woman who directed You Were Never Really There with Joaquin Phoenix? Damn. Oh.
All right, let's put her on the short list. Who else? Because I'm going to throw Catherine Bigelow on there just because she deserves to be on all lists of any movie with any action. She won't do it, but I would put her in the room.
Lynn Ramsey.
This is her movie. She does brutal, uncompromising, action horror type scenes. That movie, You Were Never Really Here, is the tone that we were talking about for this movie. I'm getting all in on her.
Yeah, I'll see your bet, and I don't know poker, so Ron, help me. How do I agree with Bill using poker terms? I match it.
Also go all in, and then you guys
double
have the
down,
same hand, and we all win. You chop the pot.
Right, and I'll do my normal thing, just like Ron throws in Tom Holland all the time. I'm gonna throw Nina DaCosta into everything until she gets her due. Although after Candyman, she just got some huge movie, like some DC superhero type movie. Nia DaCosta just got that, so maybe she won't need the Universal Monsters. But yeah, I like Lynn Ramsey.
What was Nia DaCosta's first movie? Where did she get Candyman off of?
It's Little Woods. And some other stuff. And Little Woods had Tessa Thompson in it, and it has two women who are basically having to be drug dealers to save their lives, basically, and all the stuff that falls out with two women trying to do a crime thing.
Interesting.
Yeah, I did make a huge mistake in not saying Jensen Ackles should be part of this. I think he's obviously
he can
Dracula.
be in the prosthetics of the creature from the Black Lagoon. How about that?
That would be amazing.
Sure. I want him to do his voice.
He plays Frankenstein, like the monster.
Right. And I say we leave off casting the creature for the Black Lagoon until the next movie because we don't really get to know his whole story in this one.
I think you almost do like Gollum in the first Lord of the Rings where you don't 100% see it until later.
Yep.
I think that applies to all these characters. I mean, I don't even know if you meet Dracula in this first movie, who would probably be our most human looking character, but I still see him as having crazy prosthetics like Gary Oldman, ironically enough, in Hannibal, where he played the guy whose face got ripped off.
Yeah.
It's like, that's how I see our Dracula, this horrible science experiment gone cannibal. That's how I see him playing.
Yeah, hardcore. Yeah. So yeah, well that'll be something for them to tune in for the sequel. Maybe in the new rebooted season 4, we'll do the sequel.
All right, well, guys, despite the fact that I don't think any of you thought we would get to this point, I always had faith. We have achieved Reboot, people.
Look, I don't apologize for being the stick in the mud because I didn't want to do League of Extraordinary Crapness. And I think we came to something so much better. I am very pleased at how it turned out.
I agree.
I'll do like Ron. I concur.
Thank you, Doctor.
And I shall do like the reiterator. And I concur.
Well, there's a happy Halloween for all you folks. I hope your bags are full and you get more treats than tricks. If you like what we're doing here, as always, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell. We're here every week, and we'll be back next week. We might do a little something different next week, so you have to be subscribed so you can check out our community posts. You know, they've got that weird YouTube thing where you can sort of post Instagram-like posts. We use it, but you don't see it unless you're subscribed. So subscribe. Next time we'll be back. We got more reboots coming. We're only about halfway through season 3, people. So get on board. And in the meantime, enjoy your Halloween. For Billy Business, for Ed Grier, for Ron Swallow, I'm producer Bill. We'll see you next time.